Welcome to the Reigate Lecture Series. We're so happy to see so many people participate today. Sorry we can't see you in person, but maybe we will see you on the seats of the politics department classrooms next September. So welcome to everybody, people who are Reigate College students, people who might become Reigate students, and also the family of all the participants here today. I understand that one of our participants has about 20 family members listening in. So his name is Christian Kelly, and he will be debating this topic in a second. But my name is Nick Souza. I'm the head of politics at Reigate College. And today we have not one but two mini lectures, one given by myself. I will be arguing that democracy in the UK is in big trouble. And my friend and esteemed colleague, Matthew Phillips, will be kicking us off, arguing that democracy in the UK is in very good shape indeed. Now, before we start, I just wanted to let you know of a few other things that are going on. I will introduce the students halfway through the lecture. You can see their lovely little faces, but they will take part in the debate after Matthew and I have given our lecture. You can use the Q&A facility in Zoom to ask us any questions you want, or pose a statement perhaps about what you are hearing. You can ask questions about what it's like to study politics as well. It doesn't just have to be about this topic. It can be anything about being a Reigate College student as well. Also, we have a poll that you can participate in at the end of the lecture. The poll is basically, is UK democracy in trouble? Yes or no. So we will see, therefore, which side will win. And I hope that my side will win, because I believe that democracy in the UK is in trouble. However, I'd like to introduce you now to, as I said, my friend and colleague, and also my co-host of the A-Level Politics show. If you can search for that in Apple Podcasts and Spotify, it's free. And Matthew and I release an occasional podcast on politics that helps politics students. So I hope you can look for that in your spare time. But without further ado, Matthew Phillips will be talking you through why UK democracy is in good shape. Matthew.
Right, good evening, everyone. So what we're going to start off with first is the reasons why democracy is not in trouble. And what we need to look at first is, what does a democracy need? Now, as Nick said there, what we're thinking about is whether democracy is in trouble. So the first thing that I'm going to be looking at, and Nick will look at the other side of the case as well, all around these same themes, we need to think about whether power lies in many places rather than just one. So the first thing I'll look at is this idea of devolution. And if it's in good health, then we will hope that power is shared out from the centre, and we're seeing laws and decisions being made outside of just London. The second factor, and what we would like democracy to have, are free and fair elections. And we'll look at what that means, and also Nick will look at what the threats might be to those elections as well. The third criteria is looking at Parliament. We want a Parliament that holds the government to account, that scrutinises the government and its work, but also represents the public as well through how it votes, meeting constituents, and those sorts of actions as well. The penultimate factor that we'll look at is rights, freedoms. How well are they being protected? How well are your rights, your freedoms being protected, mainly really from the government? And lastly, looking at how we can participate in politics and how healthy that participation is as well. So if we look at the first area, we're looking at this idea, does power lie in many places? Well, clearly, when we look at this area, democracy is not in trouble because power has been distributed out from the centre. Before 1998, power was largely held in London, in the UK Parliament, mainly in the House of Commons. But since then, as time has gone on, we have seen the creation of the Northern Irish Assembly, the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Parliament, and we've also most recently seen the creation of mayors, the most famous of which is Sadiq Khan, based in London. We're also seeing increasingly more and more powers being devolved, handed out from the centre to these other regions. So to give you a couple of examples of how this actually impacts our everyday lives, the first one is looking at the issue of organ donation. So the system used to be an opt-in system. You had to specify that you wanted to donate organs when you pass away. However, the system now has radically changed. So first of all, this started in Wales ever since 2015. In Wales, it's an opt-out system. So you have to specify that you don't want to be part of that system. And that idea has been so popular and has worked so well that in March of this year, it was expanded and extended into Scotland and is now UK wide. So you can see that these ideas are not just experiments, they actually work and they can be translated and used across the UK. The second example, perhaps the most noteworthy example, is how the different regions of the UK have handled the coronavirus pandemic. Now, of course, the rates of COVID have varied wildly from one region to the next, depending on population sizes and other factors. Now, to give you an example, England was the first region in the UK to unlock, to open businesses again and that sort of thing on the 19th of July. And then that later, in Scotland and Wales, they reopened in mid-August. So you can see that these different regions are responding to the wishes and the needs of the local people, depending on what the local situation is. Indeed, looking at it at the moment, for example, in places like Scotland and Wales, you need a vaccine passport to go to places like nightclubs, cinemas, festivals, things like that. England doesn't have those things. So you can see that they are responding to the ideas and the needs of the people that they represent. Now, Robert is going to talk more about devolution, so I'm going to move on to the next factor, which is elections. And again, when you look at our elections, and you certainly, if you compare it to elections held in other countries, looking at countries even in Europe, for example, looking at countries like China, for example, as well, our country stands out for the fact that there are very low rates of voter fraud. We have a range of voting systems in place. Our elections are overseen by an electoral commission as well that makes sure that the rules are being followed and that parties are not overspending as well. And we also have clear choice as well between left-wing parties, right-wing parties. So we don't really see a situation like we have in China, say, where it's a one-party system. We have genuine choice. And Christian is going to talk more about representation, so I'll let him continue on with that a little bit later. Now, the third factor is looking at Parliament. Now, what we want to see in a democracy is a Parliament that represents its citizens, its constituents, and also holds the government to account. So when we think about, well, does Parliament represent the public? Well, the first thing we need to think about is, well, who is doing this? Who is in Parliament? And if you look at the House of Commons, we now have the most diverse House of Commons in history. And that's what you can see on the left-hand side. So usually the thing that the news focuses on most is the number of female MPs. So we now have 220 female MPs, which is the most that we've ever had in history. And that's an increase of 12 on 2017. So you can see that there is a real positive trajectory there. But if you look at outside of the representation of women, there is 1 in 10 MPs in the House of Commons are non-white. And if you compare that to 10 years ago, where it was just 1 in 40, again, you can see that is a real dramatic improvement. And hopefully that means that also, because people can see people like them that sound and look like them in the House of Commons, future generations hopefully will be encouraged to become politicians as well and get involved in politics too. Now, I mentioned about who is in the House of Commons, and indeed there's more women than men representing the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party. We can also need to think about how MPs represent us as well. So MPs very often get a very negative coverage in the news, but these people on average work 69 hours a week, so far in excess of a full-time job. And these people spend a lot of their time in their constituencies, meeting their constituents face-to-face, over the phone, via social media. And for them, for many MPs, this is the part of the job that actually they enjoy most. And because these people are reaching out to their constituents, it helps them to also challenge and scrutinise the government. So, for example, because of the feedback that MPs got from their constituents, the government was forced into a U-turn, for example, to extend the furloughing scheme. The furloughing scheme was very popular. It was a very unpopular thing to try and end it, and so it was extended. You may also have heard in the news about how exam results in England were going to be based on an algorithm. And this was very, very unpopular. And again, MPs caught wind of that through their meetings with their constituents. And again, that's what allowed them to apply pressure on the government. And again, the government U-turned. They changed their mind and changed the system that was going to help them to decide what exam results were going to be. The second from last point is looking at the protection of rights and freedoms. So since 1998, we've had the Human Rights Act. And this basically means that our rights are now in law. So things like the right to vote, right to an education, these sorts of rights. Now, if we have a look at a couple of examples, you can see how it really translates into the real world as well. So at the top left hand of your screen there, this refers to the Steinfeld and Caden case that happened in 2018. And this was all about civil partnerships. So before 2018, a civil partnership was only reserved for homosexual same-sex couples. But since 2018, because of this Supreme Court case, this right has been extended to same-sex couples as well. So you can see that not just are the Supreme Court upholding the Human Rights Act, but it's forcing the government to rethink and change the laws as well. That second example at the bottom there refers to the Awida versus UK Supreme Court case that took place in 2013. And this was all about the protection of religious rights. So the most notable example involved a employee of British Airways who was asked to cover her necklace, the cross around her neck. And she said it was an expression of her religious beliefs, and she won that Supreme Court case. And it shows that, again, the Supreme Court are sticking up for people's rights and freedoms. On the right-hand side there, you can see the other big law act that is in place to protect people's rights and freedoms as well. And this is the Equality Act that's been in place since 2010. So you can see there's 9 protected characteristics there, including things like preventing discrimination based on disability, your sexuality, your race, whether you're married or not, what your age is. And you can see all those different characteristics now are protected. And it means that you can't be discriminated against simply because of who you are or what you believe. Now, the last area will be covered by Mariam shortly, so I won't go into great detail here. But the main things that I would just say is that we've seen a range of different ways now that people can participate. So we've already mentioned elections. We've already mentioned about taking your court cases to the Supreme Court as well, which is another form of participation. But it's perhaps we most famously now hear about referendums. And in the Scottish independence referendum, the turnout there was 85%. 16 and 70-year-olds could and did get involved. If you think about the Brexit referendum, the turnout there was 72%. And again, many people who had never got involved in politics before were engaged by that and got involved because they felt that their voice and their vote was actually meaningful and meant something. The middle exhibit is about e-petitions, which is a new way to participate. Perhaps the most famous one is the 6.1 million people who signed up to a revoke Article 50 and remain in the EU e-petition. And again, shows that when people are given the opportunity to participate, they will. And the last exhibit is about pressure groups. So you've probably heard about groups like Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter, and really this allows people from all different ages and backgrounds as well, particularly young people, to engage in politics in ways that may otherwise not do or have not done in the past.
Okay, well, thank you, Matthew, for that. And I have the dubious responsibility of responding to that absolutely fantastic presentation. So if you bear with me, I'm just going to bring up my slides and my exhibits, and hopefully when you vote at the end, you'll all vote for me and for my side, because I believe that democracy is indeed in a lot of trouble in the UK. Let's just go back then to what a democracy actually needs. It needs power to lie in many places, just as Matthew said, and he then went on and gave a very eloquent argument about how we have devolution and that decisions are made in many places, that we need free and fair elections, that we need a parliament that holds the government to account and represents the people, that we have rights and freedoms that are protected, and that we have public participation to ensure that our rulers have legitimacy when they make their decisions which affect us all. So these are the standards. These 5 features of democracy are the standards we set ourselves and we set our government. So power is supposed to start with the first one. Power is supposed to lie in many places, or does it? So let's look at Exhibit A, the Green Seal lobbying scandal. This is where the former Prime Minister, David Cameron on the left there, exploited his former contacts. That includes the current Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, and the then Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, to try and persuade the government to give a company that Cameron was working for a government contract. Now, Cameron stood to make a lot of money if the government did give Green Seal that contract. He is essentially exploiting his public position, his status as the former Prime Minister, and his contacts that he made when he was an MP for private gain. We also see it with Owen Paterson, the disgraced MP, using his contacts as a politician to benefit a company that was paying him. We've also seen Tory party treasurers being awarded peerages, that's special positions in the House of Lords, in our parliament. So if you raise a lot of money, or if you donate a lot of money to the Conservative Party, you get to be in parliament yourself and you get to help write the laws. I don't think that's power in a lot of places. I think that's a lot of mates working together to stitch up the system for the rest of us. Now, I also want to refer to this idea that devolution, that power being transferred from central government to places like the Scottish Parliament, has meant that we all now have control, that we've taken back control as a country, that decisions are made at the lowest possible level. Well, not if you think about local council funding. The democratic ideal, of course, is having decisions taken at a local level as possible, but that's far from reality. The UK remains the most centralised Western democracy in the world. This image that I've got in front of you shows how much of England's funding, English council funding comes from central government, and that one, overall budgets have been squeezed, and two, that the local government actually depends on central government. So all of that money that's coming from central government, about half of the money that local governments receive, comes with strings attached. We will give you this money, but we want you to do X, Y, and Z. That's the central government dictating to local councils what they should do. So when you think of your local council, what do you think of? You think of bin collection, right? That's because that's all the power they have, folks. And until we have proper English devolution on par with, say, what is happening in the Scottish Parliament, we don't really have power lying in many places. So I now want to come on to the next standard, that elections should be free. They should be fair. Are they free? I think that's debatable. Not all 16 and 17-year-olds can vote, for example. Are they fair? Absolutely not. And let me explain why. We use a system called first past the post in our general elections. And all you need to do to win an area, which we call a constituency, is to win the most votes in that constituency. So I've just got a make-believe constituency here. Let's call it constituency 1. And in this constituency 1, as you'll see in that column, the Conservative Party win 4 votes. There are 10 votes in total. But the Labour Party win 3 votes and the Liberal Democrats win 3 votes. So you might think, oh, that's fair. The person with the most votes, the party with the most votes, wins that constituency. The Conservatives win a seat to Parliament. However, if you look in that constituency, most people have actually voted against the Conservative. And so what you get, if this is repeated nationally, is a system where there's a disproportional relationship between the vote share a party receives and the seats that they get in Parliament. In our imaginary system, if you look at the last 2 columns, the Conservative Party gets 8 votes across those 3 constituencies in that chart. That's 27% of the total vote, but they win 66% of the seats. And that is because this system rewards parties whose vote is concentrated rather than whose vote is spread out. And so it gives a big winner's bonus to the party whose vote is what we say efficient, where they can get just about enough votes in enough areas. But it is unfair to parties, usually smaller parties, whose vote is spread out across the country, where they never finish first, but they might finish second or third. So in 2015, in that general election, the Conservative Party won only 37% of the vote, but they got 51% of the seats. In 2001, Labour got 41% of the vote, but they got 63% of the seats. A massive, what we call winner's bonus. And it's why Lord Helsham described our system as an elected dictatorship. The parties stand for election, but then they go off and do what they want because they can dominate Parliament. And on this next ideal that Parliament should be representative, that it should hold our government to account, there is just one sentence I have to say to that, and it is this: our Parliament is the government. Our Parliament is the government. What do I mean by that? Well, it means that, unlike in the US, where there's a separate election for a president and separate election for the Congress, their version of Parliament, in this country, the government sits in Parliament, and with its parliamentary majority is able to dictate what Parliament does. We call that the fusion of powers. And so it can determine legislative outcomes much more easily. And while, yes, we have more women in the House of Commons, we have more people from minority backgrounds. Just look at that picture there of all those people in fancy dress. Those people, folks, are your lawmakers in the House of Lords. That's half of Parliament, and none of them are elected. And some of them got there because their daddy's daddy happened to be a peer in the House of Lords. We have hereditary peers in the House of Lords. There's only 2 countries in the world that has an hereditary element in our Parliament. Lesotho is one, and we are the other. So you can see that we can't say we're truly representative if half of our parliament is unelected. Now, I want to turn to this issue of rights as well. The idea is that we should have freedoms from the government, that the government should not interfere in our lives too much, and that we should have access to information, and that information should be readily available. That's the idea of a liberal democracy. So on the right hand side there, you will see just a lot of black ink. Now, that was information on MPs' expenses. It's a scandal that happened about a decade ago, but it pops up from time to time. And what that is showing, what it should be showing, is that MPs were on the make, that they were claiming money for all sorts of things, whether it was for their mansions, whether it was for their second homes. And when journalists asked the government to provide information on MPs' expenses, what was released was heavily redacted, hence all of that black ink. We have one of the weakest Freedom of Information Acts in the Western world, and therefore our freedom to find out what information the government has and if it's in the public interest is severely curtailed. The government is currently stalling on releasing data about where migrants coming from across the Channel have actually come from, and whether they have been granted asylum. It was claimed by the government that a lot of the migrants coming across the Channel, and tragically losing their lives, some of them last week, were economic migrants. But actually, the data doesn't bear that out. Some estimates say that 75% of the people coming to this country across the Channel face torture if they were returned. So they are not economic migrants like the government has claimed. Yet we don't know really what the picture is, because the data has not been released. The government controls the information flow to the rest of us. I also want to want you to look at that picture on the left-hand side, and it's going to be what our students are picking up on in the debate later on. This picture is the vigil for Sarah Everard in Clapham. Of course, she was tragically murdered by a Metropolitan Police officer. But later on, that vigil was broken up by police, and police are gaining all sorts of powers to curtail the sacred right to protest. Now, this vigil was attended by two very important people, the most important of which was my wife, who felt very strongly about violence towards women in society and how it shouldn't be accepted. And the other was the Duchess of Cornwall. They attended that vigil. Both were concerned about the level of violence against women and girls in society. So it was a worthy thing to attend. But the policing bill currently going before the UK Parliament will give police further powers to break up protests, allowing them to take into account things like the level of noise that a protest is causing. So our government is neither as liberal or as limited as it ought to be, and therefore our rights are under threat. And then I finally come to participation. And Matthew pointed out some different ways that we can participate, either through voting or through new forms of participation online, through e-petitions and so on. It's great to participate, but what of its quality? So Matthew pointed out that many more women are now in Parliament, but nearly 45% of women parliamentarians have received threats of death, rape, beatings or abduction during their term. It's great that more people in Parliament than ever before are from minority backgrounds, but what if several of them are receiving social media comments calling them the N-word every single day of their lives? More than 80% faced psychological abuse, largely on social media. And you may think this is not that important, but let me leave you with this horrible statistic. 2 MPs have been murdered in the last 5 years. 2 MPs have been murdered in the last 5 years. That doesn't happen every day in other countries. And the fact that it perhaps is no longer so shocking should send shockwaves through this entire debate stage. So I do wonder whether the kind of participation we are seeing is actually healthy. I remember the day after the Brexit referendum, walking through Hammersmith, where I used to work, and I saw a Polish centre there that was defaced with swastikas, a Polish centre. Maybe that referendum was about the EU, but for a lot of people, it was about immigration. And for a lot of people, it was about unleashing the beast of racism in this country. That Polish centre was established by people who had fought for this country when Poland was annexed by Germany and Russia. And they fought in the RAF. And they set that Polish centre up when they settled in this country after 1945, after facing the Nazis, just like people in this country did. And yet their centre was defaced with these swastikas in the morning after the referendum. You can't tell me that those actions and that referendum are unlinked in some way. So we need healthy discussion. But what we see with social media perhaps is a license for violent language and then violence itself. And democracy is not about unfettered right to free speech if that so-called speech does harm. I just want to also point out that the traditional ways of participating are on the decline. So we see here, Exhibit B, that membership of political parties is very low. About 1 million people were members of the Conservative Party in the 1950s. So before we go on to the student debate, I just want you to think about some of the suggestions to improve our democracy, if you happen to agree with me that it needs improving. Perhaps lowering the voting age, expanding how many people can vote, changing that electoral system that is deeply unfair, having devolution in England, not just Scotland and other places. Joe will be talking about the need for a codified constitution, maybe making voting compulsory if we think participation is so important, and a strengthened freedom of information law where we can get access to what our government is doing, an elected House of Lords perhaps. And I also want to leave you with this little picture here, which was a suffragette picture, what a woman may be and yet not have the vote. And you can see all the lovely things and amazing things they can be, and what a man may be and yet not have the vote. I think we could swap that out for 16 and 17-year-olds. We have 16 and 17-year-olds who are carers. We have 16 and 17-year-olds who are keeping the country running, whether it's Eat Out to Help Out last year or working in superstores and visiting neighbours who are lonely and so on. We have amazing young people in this country, especially at Reigate College, where I hope you all come. And so I think they should have the right to vote. What do you think? Let us know in the chat. Now, we will just come out of here and go to our main event, which is to involve our fantastic students. And before we do that, I just want to introduce them, and I'll start with Annie, who is going to argue that democracy is dying. Democracy is not in good shape. Annie, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what your plans are?
My name is Annie. I study English literature, history and politics here at Reigate College, and in the future I'd like to go to university and study politics and international relations.
Thank you. And we also have Joe Critchlow, who's also going to be arguing that democracy is not in a great shape. Joe, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Joe. I study classics, politics and history here at Reigate College, and next year I hope to study archaeology and anthropology. Thank you.
Archaeology and Right, fantastic. Thank you, Joe. And also now over to Mariam, who's going to defend democracy in this debate. Mariam, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Mariam. I study psychology, criminology, politics and musical theatre, and I want to do drama at university.
Fantastic. What a diverse range of students we have, and all the different avenues that they want to explore. We now go to Christian. Tell us what you hope to do, Christian.
So I study maths, economics and politics, and I hope to study politics and economics at University of Exeter or University of York.
Fabulous. And last but certainly not least, Robert Weller. Tell us all about yourself, Robert.
I'm Robert. I study politics, history and public services, and in the future I want to study in politics and international relations at university.
Fantastic. Right. So what we're going to do, we are going to kick off the debates. We're going to start with Christian, who's going to focus a little bit on representative democracy. And after he's spoken, the students will chip in. If you see me doing that or that, it's not because I'm really cool. It's because I'm pointing in the direction of students who are sitting either side of me at a social distance with lots of ventilation, because we care about health and all that. So we're going to start with Christian. Christian, start us off, kickstart this debate for us.
So democracy isn't in trouble in my view, and one topic to defend it is that we have a mixture of representative and direct democracy. For example, our representative democracy is that we have general elections at least every 5 years, as set in stone by the Fixed Term Parliaments Act of 2011, where politicians are held to account by their local constituents every 5 years at the least, unless a snap election is called, where people vote early before these 5 years and hold their representatives to account. We also have something called direct democracy, where, for example, we have the use of referendums, the most recent one being the 2016 EU referendum, which decided the membership of the UK in the European Union. And this voting turnout was 72%. So therefore, we do have quite a high turnout, significantly higher than some of our general election turnouts. So when we have a mixture of direct and representative democracy, maybe it enforces that we have a democratic political system and that we aren't in trouble.
Thank you. So Annie, you had your hand up first. Why is Christian wrong?
I'd just like to circle back to something that Christian said about the Fixed Terms Parliament Act, and I feel as though this is going to come up a lot in mine and Joe's argument, but the Fixed Terms Parliament Act is an act of Parliament, and as Parliament is sovereign, they have the power to repeal this. So even though it does lay out a foundation for having regular elections, there's no guarantee that it will stay in place due to the fact that the government controls Parliament.
As you can see, our students are great at putting up their hands and contributing. So Joe, I'm going to go with Joe first, and then Christian, you can come back.
To address another one of Christian's points, referendums in general, due to our lack of a codified constitution, it means there is no actual legal framework for a referendum. So when a referendum is held and a vote is held in it and it goes before Parliament, all that referendum amounts to is essentially a popularity gauge for a piece of legislation. And it's only until Parliament ratifies that it becomes binding law. Of course, it will be a bad idea for any Parliament to veto a referendum. However, that's an ability they can do. It's always a threat that they can just overrule a referendum like that. And furthermore, referendums offer very binary choices between yes or no, which muddy the political spectrum present in the UK. For example, with the Scottish independence referendum, there was it presented as, do you want Scotland to be independent, or do you not want it to be independent? When later on during the referendum, party leaders came together and said, if Scotland votes no, then they will pursue a plan called Devo Max, in which devolution is pushed to its very limit within Scotland. And so that means that there are like suddenly three groups of people within Scotland with their views that want to represent their views. You have people who want independence, people who want status quo, and people who want Devo Max. And those last two options are bundled into one choice.
Okay, so referendums create binary choices, Christian. And if you'd like to respond to Annie and to Joe.
Okay, so to respond to Annie, you say it's an act of Parliament, and that apparently the government's has the power to revoke this. But even before we had this Fixed Term Parliaments Act, we had general elections every 4 or 5 years. And if you have them every 4 years, such as Tony Blair's government, 97 to the 2001 election, that's 4. 2001 to 2005, that's 4 again. And then
you learn a lot of maths here, right?
So yeah, there's no evidence that government's gonna pursue their position and abuse their position when it comes to elections. And onto Joe's point is that we have referendums, so people in safe constituencies maybe have their voice heard, because with referendums, direct democracy, we have literally the electorate deciding on political issues. It's got nothing to do with, although the government enforces it, and if they don't, they face political suicide where we can hold them to account. But doesn't that enforce democracy if the people are literally deciding how countries run?
Okay, just go to Mariam.
To come back on Joe's point and also to kind of elaborate on Christian's point, I would argue that even though the results of referendums aren't legally binding, that is actually a strength, because it allows the representatives who we have elected and who tend to have more political expertise to kind of make the final decision on important issues and still allow the public to give their opinion, because rarely have the government ever gone against what the public has voted on in a referendum. And also the way that we hold them to account is we can just choose not to elect them again. So if they choose to go against the result of a referendum, we can always hold them to account by not electing them in the next election.
And last point to Annie.
I take Christian and Mariam's points. I think they're excellent points. I'd just like to come back to something Christian said earlier about representative democracy. And I'd like to argue that largely due to our voting system, we don't actually have a great democratic, representative democracy. Basically, it's very flawed in this country. So, for example, in the 2019 election, if you take into consideration the voter turnout and also the amount of people who voted for Conservatives, that actually averages around 29% of the UK potential voters who did vote for the party that is now in power. And I'd also like to argue that even though representation in Parliament is increasing as in terms of social diversity, it's still nowhere near reflective of the UK. So, for example, only about a third of MPs are women, whereas 54% of the British population is women. So it's not actually reflective.
Okay, so I just want to just finish that particular bit, and then we're going to ask another student to make their case. But I just want to ask Matthew. Been very silent there, Matthew. Is that because your argument is so weak?
Hi everyone, that's me back. Yes, I just wanted to, I think what Mariam said was a very, very good point. Elections are one of the main ways that we do hold our representatives to account. But we also have recall elections as well now. So MPs like Fiona Onasanya, who was a Labour MP, and I think his name was Chris Davies, which was a Conservative MP. Both of them lost their positions as MPs for abusing power or doing things that were against the law. And recall elections are a new way that the public constituents can trigger petitions, can trigger recall elections, and eventually remove their elected representatives as well. So it's not just elections that we also have recall elections as well. So we have lots of different ways, new ways to hold our representatives to account if we need to.
Thank you very much, Matthew, even though I think you're completely wrong. Let's go now to Annie, who's going to make the case that democracy is in a bad way.
So I'm going to present the argument that actually representatives in themselves do not act democratically, largely because there's often financial incentive or political personal gain that prevents them from representing their views of their constituencies. So, for example, between 2001 and 2009, the lobbyist group Conservative Friends of Israel donated around £10 million to the Conservative Party, which creates the argument of whether or not the Conservative Party can really make decisions in a non-biased way if they've got these outside influences coming through.
Okay, so who would like to respond? Christian, you have your hand up. Go for it.
So if we're talking about lobbying, I agree it is an issue. However, we had this lobbying scandal of Owen Paterson, which I'm sure one of you will mention. But the result of him breaking the rules and the government's U-turn is the government listens to the people who are clearly very, very unhappy about it, hence the U-turn, and the MP has resigned. So doesn't that take into account how strong our democracy is? Because if someone's caught, you know, breaking the rules and being corrupt, then they resign and they lose their job. Isn't that perfect scrutiny?
Okay, perfect scrutiny. Joe?
To address Christian's point, yes, I'm going to bring up the Owen Paterson thing again, because not only did you have the whole Owen Paterson scandal where he had a second job while making government policy, no doubt leading to influence on that. However, in the parliamentary debates over it, what happened is that the Conservatives, rather than immediately rushing to remove this dangerous element of their party, who was being heavily lobbied, instead what they did was overhauled the Independent Review Commission into corruption and lobbying within Parliament, meaning effectively they, instead of taking the fight to lobbying interests that targeted the Conservative Party, what they did was weakened the methods and modes that Parliament can use to fix corruption and lobbying within itself. So therefore, I think that points to some amount of lobbying and corruption inherent to UK democracy.
Okay, so I'm mindful of time, so I'll just take Annie's point and then we're going to move on to the next speaker. So Annie.
So Christian does make a good point in saying that the government perhaps listened to the will of the people and that's why they made their U-turn. But I would actually argue that it's the influence of the media rather than the people that forced them to make this U-turn. And whilst Christian is going to make the point that we have free speech and so the media can say what it wants and that points to democracy, in fact, I would argue that the media itself is in the hands of a few centralised elitists who own many of the news outlets, and therefore, again, power is in the hands of a few centralist elites.
Right, so I'm going to move on just because I'm aware of time and I want to get everybody's kind of little spiel in. So we've had Christian, we've had Annie. So now we're going to turn to Mariam. And I've dropped my water. Mariam, and she's going to talk a little bit about participation and stuff.
So participation is a key pillar to healthy democracy, because what is democracy other than the voice of the public being heard? I would argue that even though there's people who might make the argument that participation in our general elections has decreased, I would say, even though that's not true, participation in other forms has increased, like through e-petitions and social media, which I would actually argue is an advantage because it allows people who are underrepresented, such as 16 and 17-year-olds who can't vote, to kind of get their points across and to participate in democracy. It also leads to people being more educated because of how much they participate in it. An example which Matthew brought up earlier was the EU, for the e-petition for a second EU referendum, which did encourage there to be a second EU referendum, and it was signed by over 4 million people. So it shows how it can get a really large group of people to participate in democracy more.
Thank you. Before we go on, I just want to point out that this is not the politics department Christmas tree. Our Christmas tree is much bigger, much better, and much more political. And it's much more environmentally friendly as well. So, Robert, do you want to build on your colleagues' comments?
With different types of participation, you've got social media, and I think in today's society, social media has become a vital part of our political system. It's helped people organise protests. You had the vigil from Sarah Everard and also the Black Lives Matter protest last year. You see that with social media, it's become a vital tool for, if like 20 years before, where it wouldn't have been able to have been used. It's been able to organise people to form mass protests over the entire country, which I think is vital in even underrepresented communities, showing that they disagree with the government, which I don't think would have been able to have happened at such a large scale 20, 30 years ago.
So Annie.
So that's a very good point about the increase in different forms of participation. However, I'd just like to point out perhaps the flaws in their quality. So one of the key elements of democracy is obviously free and fair elections and free and fair participation, if you like, and the choice to make your own decisions. But I'd argue that unregulated forms of participation perhaps leave more of an opening for voter manipulation and for pressuring to come in. So, for example, voting online or e-petitions or social media all leave opportunities for people to perhaps pressure someone into promoting views they don't agree with or voting a different way to how they might align, or for independent groups that actually come and maybe corrupt a result and things like that. So I'd just like to argue that actually it's perhaps not as democratic as the other side might argue.
Okay, and so back to Christian.
So on the subject of e-petitions, I can give you two very good examples right now. For example, Marcus Rashford, as we all know, free school meals were stopped from being scrapped by the government via an e-petition by Marcus Rashford that gained so much support. So I think that is a strength, that one e-petition that's clearly backed by many people, as so many people signed it, can influence government policy and really decide on our like politics in today. Another one is the tampon tax removed. 330,000 people signed it, and this year Rishi Sunak has declared that the tampon tax has been removed. So maybe that's a sign that as we move into more digitalized world, the e-petitions are strong and they've been used effectively to influence government policy.
And Joe.
While some people may have found success with e-petitions, in the worlds of protests themselves, there's nothing actually that binds Parliament to do anything about a protest. So let's take, for example, 2003, you had the anti-Iraq war protest, one of the biggest protests in UK history. I believe it still is the biggest protest in UK history. The government simply did nothing about it. They didn't have to. And they already had the popularity to move forwards. And so when the government is faced with a situation where there's a policy it wishes to pursue, and it already has the backing support that it needs to get through the rest of its electoral term, it just won't do anything about a protest, showing how this mode of democracy, protests, e-petition, it's very dependent on a government's current situation. So, and if like a form of democracy, something that's meant to help propel it forward, is dependent on circumstance, can you really argue that it's effectively working as intended?
Last comment, Mariam. Not for this particular section. Yeah.
I just want to return kind of on Annie's point, although I understand where she's coming from. I would argue that it kind of neglects the idea that political manipulation can also come from our main parties. And I would say that because they can, before a general election, they can kind of campaign in a way to make you think anything about politics, really. And I actually think that the increased forms of democracy allow people to share ideas with each other and become more educated in a way that can sometimes be less biased than if their main source of information was coming from general election campaigns.
That's lovely, thank you. So we're now going to go on to, I'm getting told off by Denise here because I keep forgetting to turn my mute button off. But we're now going to go to Joe, who's going to sum up the arguments for your side.
So my argument is about effectively the lack of codified constitution within the UK and what that means for our democracy. So without a codified constitution, there's nothing to hold a UK Parliament to account, because essentially UK Parliament is sovereign, which means that they have the ability to do whatever they want as long as they have majority votes in Parliament for it. So there are no entrenched citizens citizens' rights within the UK. There are no entrenched human rights or political rights. And furthermore, there is no entrenched separation of powers. In terms of what no entrenched human rights means for UK citizens, it means that stuff like the latest protest bill can come into effect, which effectively ruins our right to protest, as seen as police can be called in for something as simple as a noise complaint, and protests do tend to get quite noisy, especially peaceful ones. So they can just be, taken out like that.
We have the breaking. Matthew wants to say something, even though Mariam's had her hand out for a lot longer. But we do train students really well to just keep their hands up for as long as possible. It's good for their muscles. So Matthew, go for it.
I'm more than happy for Mariam to go first, I should say that. So I was just going to quickly say two things. First thing, because we live in such a vibrant democracy, we allow these protests to happen no matter what they might well be. We even allow in this country protests about anti-vaccination, things like that, things that are really quite controversial. They're allowed to happen. They're policed, they're protected. And this policing bill that we hear so much about is not actually a law. It's not actually in place. So it's nothing to worry about. I'm sure it will be revised in Parliament. It doesn't exist just yet. And we need to remember also that while there is that fusion of powers that Joseph mentioned, there might not be a separation of powers. What that does allow for, and this doesn't happen in countries like the United States, is the Prime Minister to go into the House of Commons and face questions every Wednesday, Prime Minister's questions, things that a president would fear and tremble at, the idea of that sort of thing. It doesn't happen in the United States. And I think that just shows how strong our democracy is.
Thank you, Matthew. Mariam.
I would also argue that the fusion of powers isn't necessarily a weakness of UK democracy, because again, if you compare it to US democracy, you'll find that it allows for a lot more compromise, whereas in the US, the separation, if the White House and Congress are controlled by different parties, you'll find that there's often, it's often very hard to pass through legislation, things like that. And as well, on the point of the codified constitution, the lack of a codified constitution in the UK actually allows us to be more flexible with our constitution and keep up to date with how things change in society, as opposed to the US constitution, where there's loads of outdated amendments, such as the right to bear arms and the one that establishes the Electoral College, and they're really difficult to remove.
Right, well, we're really running out of time, so I'm going to, because Robert hasn't had a chance to speak and so on, so I just want, Robert, just on this last point, you just want to, you can have the final say.
Well, just going back onto the protest bill, yes, this is draft legislation, but this hasn't just come because the government has woken up one morning and said, okay, I want to restrict the right to protest. This has happened because currently in recent years, protests have become incredibly irresponsible, and there now needs to be much more of a crackdown on them. You have Extinction Rebellion that have blocked major bridges and roads in London, stopping ambulances from transporting people to hospital. You have Insulate Britain, which have been blocking the M25 and causing major traffic. If these people weren't doing that, I don't think this bill would be as extreme as it was. But the problem is that people are irresponsible, and yeah, that's
right. Well, we're going to have to bring it to the close. All I would say, I think I know what you're going to say, Annie. Is it something to do with the suffragettes? No. Okay. My response to you, Robert, would have been suffragettes are irresponsible, and look what we got with them. But before we leave, just a few things that we want to say. First of all, I want to say thank you to all the students here tonight and to Matthew for spending their time with us. But I really want to thank you, the listener, dear listener. And we've got some questions, and we've got a poll. So the poll is now live. So if you want to vote, is UK democracy in trouble? It's coming in real time, and it looks like it looks like the yes side is doing incredibly well. So, you know, if you feel that it's in a good place, get voting. If you feel that it's in a bad place, really get voting, because that was my side. Also, while that poll is cooking, we just have a few questions coming in. We have a question from Angelica. How many politics classes are there at Reigate? There are 4 classes in the first year, 4 classes in the second year. We have record numbers of students this year, 150, but because we have several classes, we can cater for that. And so class sizes are about 20 on average in the first year. In the second year, each class has 17 or 18 students. So it's nice and spacious, but it's lively enough that we can have debates like this. Carol asked, what percentage of male MPs have had threats against them? The answer is I don't know, but what I do know, more women MPs have had threats. I think we've got a question. Do we study any foreign political systems? Really good question. Yes, we study US politics and US foreign policy in the second year, and that takes us around the world basically, because the US is embroiled in so many different engagements around the world. So do we have our final vote for the poll, Denise? Okay, so the poll is that UK democracy is in trouble. That's the outcome. I want to thank everybody who took part in that poll. And actually, I think we had 97% participation, which shows that democracy is alive and well at this applicant event. And if you've enjoyed this debate, if you have enjoyed the back and forth, and judging by the fact that still so many people are with us, I think you have, then maybe think about doing politics. We're not going just yet. I feel like I'm on LBC, you know, going to a break. But we do have a couple more questions left, and I might be able to pose them too. I might be able to see them here. Let's have a look at these questions. What do you think of identity politics and the stereotypes of having to vote because you are part of a certain community? Does anyone want to have a go at that one? Right, Robert wants to have a go at that one. So Robert, go for it.
I think identity politics as a whole have completely taken over our politics in recent years. And the fact of having to vote because you are part of a certain community, I think it does more to damage democracy than it does to help it, because I think there is a lot of things, let's talk with Brexit, and there's a very common misinterpretation. A lot of people just think everyone that voted for Brexit are racist. Some of them definitely are, most of them probably not. But the thing is, when you tell people that they are something and you keep on telling them they're that, they start to believe they are. And I think you're going to have a problem, especially with the rise of the hard right and fascists in this country, that you're going to force people there by telling them they're already there.
Thank you very much, Robert. Well, you've certainly answered that better than I could. Now, we've got another question from Carol. What percentage of students get A grade, A level at Reigate? This is my favourite bit, because I can tell you that we get 85% of students A star to B. We got that in 2019, the last time there were public examinations. We got that last year when there weren't public examinations. 85% of students get what we call high grades, A star to B. It's better than most private schools, quite frankly, and these are the best results in the college. I'm very proud of them. Matthew's very proud of them. But I think the result that we are most proud of, I think you would probably nod your head if you agree, Matthew, and that is that 37% of students who finished with us last year, got their results, went on to study a politically related degree at university. And he's nodding his head, because that shows not just that they do well, but they are inspired. And that is really what we aim to do. Right, the last question is, which topics in politics do students enjoy the most? Mariam.
I mean, there's lots of topics that I think I enjoy. I specifically enjoyed feminism, which we did as one of our ideologies that we study. I also think something that maybe people wouldn't initially think is a very interesting topic that I enjoyed is electoral systems. I think it's very fascinating, especially to see like compared to other electoral systems, and also just to look at our own and be critical of it and kind of see what we can do better.
Okay, has anyone else got a favourite subject? Yeah, Christian.
My favourite topic is conservatism, because it is really the best ideology to support. So go out and vote Tory.
Okay, well, we've got an immediate comeback on that from Annie. Annie, what is your favourite topic?
I agree with Mariam in that I like feminism as a topic. I think all the ideologies, apart from conservatism, are fascinating. And I also think it's very interesting when you study UK politics, you realise how it relates to you and how actually it's the system revolving around you in this country. And then when you do US politics, you maybe see a different side of it. You maybe see how things could be done and how maybe they aren't being done here, but maybe it would be better if they are. So that's quite an interesting comparison.
Okay, thank you very much. So a variety of different opinions there on pretty much everything, and I think that's all that we've got time for now. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. We're going to put this recording up on our website, I think, Denise, aren't we? Very shortly, so you can listen to it again or share it with friends who are also thinking of taking politics at Reigate. Thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you very much, our dear students, and to you, dear listener. We hope you have a very safe and happy holiday season and new year, and we'll see you soon at Reigate. Take care. Bye-bye.